Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 19th of April 2023. Before we go to the frontline, let's have a little look at the Institute for the Study of War preamble. I think this is worthy of note. Select members of the Club of Angry Patriots are advocating for a revolution in Russia if the Kremlin freezes the war or pursues peace negotiations with Ukraine and the West. So self-proclaimed former People's Governor of Donetsk Oblast, Pavel Gubarev, defined the Club of Angry Patriots as a potentially revolutionary power that will prevent betrayal if the government decides to freeze the current front lines in Ukraine. So these are ultra-nationalists who want the government to go further. He noted that Russia cannot win the war without a revolution, either from within the government or in society, because oligarchs, agents, ethnic mafias, and nationalist separatists will not allow for the reformation of social economic institutions in support of the war effort. So everything needs to be in support of the war effort. Former Russian officer and ardent nationalist Igor Girkin noted that Gubarev's opinion does not represent the collective vision of the Club of Angry Patriots, and noted that any revolution begins with a coup from the top, over which he and other members of the group have no control over, since they do not have connections in the Kremlin. So there are all sorts of things bubbling up under the under the radar, I guess, although this is clearly now on the radar. Their Telegram account amplified a forecast regarding possible political changes within the Kremlin as a result of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which may represent the group's concern over the progress of the war. And the group amplified a post from the leader of the Russian civil solidarity movement, Fedorov, who stated that the political situation in Russia largely depends on frontline realities. Fedorov assessed that Wagner Group financier Prigozhin's recent statement about the end of the special military operation is the start of the campaign to freeze the war in Ukraine, although there are some claims that actually that was taken out of context. Fedorov stated that if Russians are able to defeat Ukrainian counteroffensives over the summer, then Russian President Putin may freeze the war to avoid calling up mobilization ahead of the 2024 presidential election cycle. Fedorov claimed that Russia would likely present a suppressed Ukrainian counteroffensive as a victory and is likely intensifying volunteer recruitment efforts to generate enough contract servicemen to hold existing front lines. So this is the idea that Russia are not looking to really take their... It's unrealistic to expect that the maximalist objectives will be obtained. What they might do is see victory as restraining the counteroffensive by the Ukrainians. If they can do to Ukraine what Ukraine has done to the Russians during their offensive phase, then Russia might sell that as a success and then freeze the war, because it'll be coming up to election, and actually a mass mobilization to achieve the initial war aims will completely damage Putin's political intentions as far as the election cycle goes. Fedorov stated that if Ukrainians are successful, the political situation in the Kremlin will lead to a deeper conflict between different parties for influence, and the Kremlin will conduct personnel changes. Fedorov claimed that despite potential mobilization and disruption in society in the Kremlin, Putin's system is capable of eliminating all threats associated with the interception of power. Fedorov noted that the most unlikely scenario is the imminent dissolution of Putin's power system, but noted that different financial, regional, and industrial figures may be preparing for such an outcome. This is interesting. We're starting to hear of these fractions and factions within Russia, vying for power, predicting what might eventually happen, so on and so forth. It's worth also looking at Anders Puck Nielsen's recent video that actually just came out this morning. I'll just highlight that. It's this one here, How the War Can Destabilize Russia, by Anders Puck Nielsen. As I say, just come out, so well worth having a little look at. Okay, let's get to the front line now. We're going to go to the northeast, which is Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna, our usual starting place. On my map, it looks like this: Kupiansk, Svatva, and then further down south, Kreminna. The ISW has this to say of what's happened in that area: Sinkivka, Dubrova, Spirina, Sinkivka, Dvorichna, Chervonopepivka, Kreminna, Tolska, Terny, Nevska. Basically, unsuccessful ground attacks. Russians claiming ground attacks assault operations. Oh, Makivka as well. So you can see that all the usual places are being mentioned, but a couple just up north as well, again, that were mentioned yesterday. Sinkivka, which is here, and Dvorichna up there. And indeed, there's some footage to suggest. So where have I got that footage? Here. So this is a BMP-1 using heat rounds, high explosive anti-tank rounds, in their gun to fire at a Russian position in the woods. This has been geolocated to this position, which I will show you is there. And that means, okay, so the BMP is there. It's firing, one presumes, at this tree line here, which means the Russians are probably indeed where I say they are. There's been this idea that Liman Pashi has been swapping hands over time. I've got it under Russian control at the moment. If that footage is to be trusted, then that is probably correct. Okay, going back to the ISW, footage published on April the 17th and 18th purportedly shows Ukrainian forces driving a captured TOS-1A thermobaric artillery system in the Svatova-Kreminna direction. And that refers to this, which is, that's just a still from the footage. So they've captured a TOS-1A thermobaric artillery system. That is very, very useful, of course. Okay, then to go back to the map to show you some of the places I was that were mentioned just then. As we come back down towards Svatova, we pass Svatova, we come across Chervonopopivka was mentioned, Terny, Torska, Dubrova, Spirna further down south from there. So all Makivka up here. So all these places still ground attacks near there. That means somewhere in this general area you are going to have attacks from either side, but no territorial exchanges taking place. Rebar, the pro-Russian source, says in the Kupiansk sector, Russian aerospace forces carry out airstrikes on Ukrainian positions near Mazukitivka, so that's up near Liman Pershi. High-precision munitions based on Fab 500 aerial bombs were again used to hit enemy positions. This is a really common occurrence. That is back up here, Mazukitivka, which is just there. That was hit by these dumb munitions that have been adapted, like the JDANs, but we just hadn't seen much of the JDANs, and we're hearing every day that these Fab 500s and possibly even larger munitions are being used. Attached to them are GPS guidance and fins to give them greater range and accuracy. They are proving to be quite a significant threat to the Ukrainians and being used on a greater scale. And then really nothing much to mention till it comes down to Bakhmut. So we will indeed go to Bakhmut next. Just not a great amount of information coming out of any particularities here. Just the odd, repelled attacks here and there. And even in Bakhmut, so Syriac Maps has no mapping updates, indicates no change of territory anywhere along the front line. And in fact, Deep State Map has only a really marginal bit of territory change along the entire front line. The only bit they have is this block taken here, as you can see, and indeed we'll see some footage. This was based on the footage from yesterday, so I had this taken yesterday because of Syriac Mapping's claims. There's a big difference between the pro-Russian Syriac map here and the pro-Ukrainian Deep State map in orange. Now, the gain is around this building here. This is the House of Culture, and we have footage of that being blown up. Indeed, here we can refer to Eagle Gherkin. So this is that building that was blown up by the Ukrainians themselves, is the claim. And whether there were Russians in there, or they didn't want the Russians getting to there, or there were Russians near there, not 100% sure. You can see just down here, you've got this sort of garden area with a circular bit of, yeah, there you go, that circular part there. This is there. So this is that building that was blown up, or indeed, yeah, that building there. So that is the cultural building that was destroyed, and therefore the idea is that is now under Russian control. So you've got that movement there. and that's it. There's no other territorial exchanges along the entire front line, at least as far as the mappers are concerned. ISW says of Bakhmut, Russian forces continued to make gains in Bakhmut on April the 18th, that's yesterday. Geolocated footage published on April the 17th indicates that Wagner Group forces have likely advanced closer to the House of Culture, which is one I was just telling you about, and that is a footnote to that bit of footage. Now, although it says continue to make gains on April the 18th, that's referring to the footage from the 17th. So actually, I don't think that does refer to gains yesterday. I'm not really sure that Russia made any gains yesterday. In fact, reporting from Ukraine, and again, take it with a pinch of salt, very pro-Ukrainian, but seems to indicate that there is counterattacks, and the momentum has shifted, and the Ukrainians are pushing back in the north and the northwest there. So, there could be a bit of a change. It could be that the Russians have properly culminated, and we might now see some pushback. Might now see some pushback from the Ukrainians. I don't know. That's absolute speculation, and that is based merely only on what reporting from Ukraine was saying. So, yeah, two sides of the story, I guess. But here, ISW talks about how unspecified claims of gains in northern, southern, central, so all around Bakhmut. I think these would be referring more to the gains that I've already reported from yesterday. Sometimes what happens is ISW bring out their report late in my nighttime. So this report would have come out sort of, I don't know, maybe 12 hours ago, maybe a little bit more, and it refers back to the last 24 to 48 hours. So a lot of their claims will be, and they'll say so, from April the 17th. Well, that is now 2 days ago. So just to give you an idea that things might have changed since then, or they're referring to older claims as far as my mapping is concerned. So Syrsky stated that Russian forces have increased heavy artillery and airstrikes against Bakhmut. So he is in charge of the Ukrainian forces. So he's saying that there's increased artillery activity from the Russians and that they are not currently suffering any artillery ammunition shortages. We've heard Yevgeny Prigozhin continually go on about needing more ammunition, and he makes his public claims and then gets it seems, and one assumes he has got that ammunition, although other people along the line in the Russian forces complain that their artillery ammunition is sent to Bakhmut and they have the hunger. So when we talk about artillery ammunition shortages, it might not be, you might look at Bakhmut and listen to Syrsky and think, well, the Russians don't have shortages. Well, no, not in Bakhmut, because Wagner keeps whining about that, and rightly so. He's got his own self-interest there to consider. But we hear from other intercepts and intelligence that those shells are taken from the Vuhledar area, for example, or from Donetsk area, from the Avdivka area, and taken up to Bakhmut. And so those areas have the shortages. So don't extrapolate from one area of the front line onto everywhere else. Okay, so Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces began to use modified FAB 500 aerial bombs. Again, these same bombs that we've seen up in Kupiansk. In fact, we've seen them being used in quite a number of places. Over in Kherson, Berislav has received a whole load of these, and not in a good way, and possibly in towns behind the front line as well. So aerial bombs equipped with the guidance systems to strike Bakhmut as of at least April the 17th, so for the last 2 days. Okay, what else can we say about Bakhmut? Well, here we go to pro-Russian source Rebar. Near Bakhmut, artillery units of airborne troops established tight fire control over Ukrainian supply routes. Having strengthened their flanks, Russian paratroopers cut the threat of counterattacks by Ukrainian formations. That's really general. I wouldn't put any store in that kind of claim. It's just too generic. In the north of Bakhmut, Russian units advanced along Tolbahina Street, capturing the hospital and garage areas. In addition, intense fighting is going on in the area of the railway elevator and Krainyaya Street. Right, the railway elevator. I presume he means the grain elevator here. Now, this still, Deep State Maps does not have that under the control of the Russians. So there is genuinely a disagreement here. So Syriac Map says that this is controlled by the Russians. Deep State Map has continuously said it has not. It is not due to a lag in the mapping here. That seems to be a disagreement. And in fact, Rebar is saying there is fighting around there. So actually, the reality is that's probably a grey area. to the south, the battle for the road to Konstantinivka continues. Ukrainian command is constantly sending fresh reserves into the battle, trying to hold on to the strategically important route. Again, that tells us nothing really. Okay, let's go to here's an interesting claim from a Bakhmut commander who says, "We're located in the Bakhmut fortress. This is a kind of a synopsis of what happened yesterday. Bakhmut defense forces are doing everything possible and impossible for the fortress to hold. The enemy seems to have gone mad today, sending wave after wave of assault groups. So even though there's little to no territorial exchange in Bakhmut, the claim here is that they are sending huge numbers of troops. Now, we have heard that the VDV and conventional forces, those are airborne troops, and conventional Russian forces have taken over definitely to the north and to the south. They're holding the defensive lines in those places, and it's becoming arguably positional battles there. We've also heard that actually they are involved inside Bakhmut as well, although the Wagner forces are further concentrated there now, having pulled out arguably from the north and the south. So you've got a greater density of Wagner troops now in Bakhmut. Could that signify a return to the use of human waves? Although we have heard that units of 5 to 10 have now been replaced by units of 20 to 40. So larger units, again, could kind of support these claims. The enemy seems to have gone mad today, sending wave after wave of assault troops. Defense forces are heroically repelling one onslaught after another, protecting every meter of our Ukrainian land in the Bakhmut fortress. The enemy is utilizing army aviation, MLRS, using artillery, tanks, and other weaponry. Again, this is what we've seen. As the conventional forces have come to support Wagner, we've seen an increased use of military equipment, mechanized equipment, as well as the Air Force dropping possibly these FAB 500 bombs. But our boys and girls are bravely standing and doing their job. Bakhmut Fortress is holding, glory to Ukraine. Okay, War Mapper says that there are no changes. There are no confirmed changes to control since the last update, although I do find them sometimes lagging a little bit in their mapping. I don't know whether, for example, it's fully accurate, although they've closed it around that pocket, that they had a much larger pocket to the south east here under, or not under Russian control. That has closed down to be much more in line with what others have said, but they still have this pocket to the east of the railway line up in the north there, and I just don't think that's accurate. You've got the grain elevator being fought over just here. There's no kind of representation of that. That swapped hands a couple of times, and yet War Mapper has kept that solidly Ukrainian. And again, up the north here, where there's sort of gains for the Ukrainians, according to at least Syriac maps, not reflected there. So I don't know, but War Mapper says no changes. We'll go to Null Reports, who says some good news south of Bakhmut, around Ivanivska and the forest area to the west. The defences are holding up well, with the aim, of course, of keeping one of Bakhmut's remaining exits clear east of Stupochki. In a counterattack, the AFU pushed the Russian forces back across the canal. This is what I reported yesterday, if you remember. And this was based on Syriac maps saying that this had taken place, and they adjusted their maps accordingly. It's interesting that Null Reports has a grey zone to the east of the canal here, whereas Syriac maps and well, in fact, I'm just reflecting Syriac maps. I've got both mappers here. So Deep State map has Russian control up to the canal, and at some points over to the west of the canal, down here and in the middle here. Syriac maps had much more extensive control of the Russians up to the north towards Stupochki, but we've had a counterattack there. But then Russian control to the west of the canal all the way down. Null Reports doesn't. Null Reports has grey zone to the east of the canal. So there are really quite widely differing maps concerning activity going on in the Bakhmut area. No Reports also references Ukrainian tankers operating in the Bakhmut area. I almost showed this yesterday. There could be an increase in mechanized equipment for the Ukrainians as well. We've heard that over the weeks, and we have had some video footage. And indeed, here is some of tanks operating in the Bakhmut area. So that's possibly worthy of note. And then in the last few hours, No Reports has said this Fighting continues in Bakhmut. Footage shows that Ukrainian troops are still present in the western part of Bakhmut, but Russian troops are making an advance along the Pivnichny pond towards the Bakhmut playground. The red dotted areas are believed to be under Russian control. So this is the area to the north where I was suggesting that Syriac Maps has advances. We've got the cultural building is just probably there on the edge of Russian control. And again, this is where he said yesterday he doubts that there's any Ukrainian presence to the east of the railway line in that northern area, which is kind of in line with this area there that that War Mapper still seems to have under Ukrainian control. He's saying that it's unlikely there's Ukrainian forces there. And they're closing the gap down in the southerly area as well. So actually, here no report says no presence for the Ukrainians to the west. That's to the east of the railway line. That's solidly under Russian control. Where here you've got a pocket, and even on my map, you have that pocket there to the east of the railway line. No reports doesn't have that. It has that solidly under Russian control. But actually, neither Syriac Maps nor Deep State Map have that under Russian control. So there are varying claims as to who controls what in Bakhmut. Right, War Monitor mentions a few hits in Klishchivka. So Ukrainian artillery hit and destroyed an ammunition depot of the Russian forces in Klishchivka. I mean, this is kind of arbitrary because actually these sort of things are happening throughout the city on both sides. So Ukrainians and Russians will be losing ammunition depots, troops, things, stuff. They'll be hit all the time. It's just interesting that a couple being hit in Klishchivka here and claiming that positions to the west of Klishchivka. So we look on my map, that is coming out again. Sorry, I'm flipping around quite a bit here. So we've got Klishchivka, up here, and possibly some activity going on around the canal there to suggest that Ukrainians might have taken back some positions there, but I've not seen that mentioned anywhere else. But we have seen we've seen some self-propelled mortars being taken out in the Klishchivka area and other places here in Kherson and Klishchivka. So the Ukrainian artillery are certainly active. Whether or not they have enough shells to do exactly what they want is another question. So anyway, that's the activity going on in Bakhmut. There are claims going from quite a number of sources. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 24, 48 hours to see whether the Ukrainians will start pushing back at all, or whether they are just going to have a continual concession of territory to the Russians, bleed the Russians as much as possible, but have some kind of understanding that they are going to lose Bakhmut. I don't know. One thing I will note is that this is possibly a tactical, psychological situation here. I think the Ukrainians are the ones that are in control, or at least they're able to exert some kind of control here. So if they are booby trapping and blowing up buildings, tactically blowing up buildings, they are controlling what the Russians get eventual control of, or they are able to plan these things to work according to a pre-organized plan. There's an element of working tactically and working to their plan here that the Ukrainians are doing. So every time we see a building blown up, they've put that in place, and they've put all the time and effort that it takes to do that. And yes, they are conceding territory, but they're doing it on their own. It's working according to their plan. On their own terms. That was a phrase I was looking for. Sometimes multiple sclerosis just ruins my brain. I can't think of the terms. So on their own terms, yes. Anyway, moving out of Bakhmut, finally, we will move on further down south, and we'll come on to Avdivka, past New York, Turetsk, Sumy, and to Avdivka. Not really an awful lot of news here either. So the general claims about Avdivka are basically unsuccessful attacks around Stepover, Berdichi, Severy, Novokalinove, Pervomaisky, Russian military blogger has claimed that Russian forces made unspecified advances near Kupiansk. I'll show you where that is in a second. But other mil bloggers said that Russian forces tried and failed to break through Ukrainian defenses in Kherson, Pervomysky, Nevelsky, and indeed Marinka. So, okay, all of these places, well, there's just the usual attacks. Novokalanyove. Kupiansk is an unspecified advance in that area for the Russians. Severny, Pervomysky, Berichi, Stepoverso, all of these places. The geolocated footage that is mentioned here. So geolocated footage shows that Russian forces have advanced up to the H20 highway northeast of Krasnohorivka. Now, I showed you this footage this morning. I didn't actually tell you where it's from. So a pilot of the Amiga group hits a pile of invaders' anti-tank mines. Interesting. And blows them up. As you can see, it crosses a road to do so. And that's the road that goes across there. That's been geolocated to here. Let's put that in the old Google Maps. And that is there. And I have signified some advances up to this road over the last sort of week. And that confirms that those advances have been made. If they put a pile of mines there, it means they're likely controlling that. In fact, I've left my blue lines there to show you the extra territory that has been gained by the Ukrainians over the last week, I guess. That was a few days back. But that's, yeah, there is a bit of, there has been an exchange of territory up there, but that's probably a couple of days old now. Okay, so moving on from Avdivka, although Vuhledar does have a map here this is the only map that Vuhledar's done today. There's not a lot of activity going on up and down the lines, at least not worthy of changing many maps. But as you can see, pressure to the north, pressure to the southwest, although it doesn't mention the Kupiansk there, and the attack towards Kherson, that's Kherson right up in the north there. Okay, so as we come out of Avdivka, we can look to the ISW to see what has happened for the rest of Donetsk. Ukrainian forces likely conducted limited counterattacks in western Donetsk Oblast. Russian mil bloggers claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian ground attacks near Vuhledar, Pavlivka, and the forest belt north of Mikilska, and posted footage of Russian forces striking Ukrainian tanks in the area. Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed or claimed ground attacks in western Donetsk on April the 18th. So we'll have a look at some of these Vuhledar claims. So as we come out of Avdivka and go down to Vuhledar, which is down in this corner of Donetsk, or the Donetsk front line, we have Vuhledar overseeing Pavlivka and Mikilska, which are on lower ground than Vuhledar. And we have had these graveyards of Russian mechanized equipment as they have, in successive attempts, tried to storm Vuhledar or attack it and have failed. They are in the line of sight of ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, or sighters for Ukrainian artillery, and they just hammer the Russians in this area. Anyway, the ISW says that Russian mil bloggers have claimed that their forces have repelled Ukrainian ground attacks near Vuhledar and in Pavlivka and a forest belt north of Mikilska, and posted footage of Russian forces striking Ukrainian tanks in the area. Now, let's look at all of these claims. So first of all, there's this claim here that says the militants of the armed forces of Ukraine tried to break through our defenses in the area of Pavlivka and Vuhledar in several groups. Our artillery is actively working on enemy positions in Orkhivo and Helopole. So, and then it goes on talking. So really, that's all it mentions there. The second source is this bit of video footage, which just shows some Ukrainian tanks driving. Doesn't show any striking. There's no video footage of tanks being hit. And that's that. And underneath it says the slur for Ukrainians in tanks a minute before yesterday's kickoff near Vuhledar. Our aviation destroyed at least 6 pieces of equipment. The lads got already with a swoop will not work. Go home. I mean, they are home for a start. It's weird. But there's no evidence of that. I mean, it may have happened. They may have taken out 6 pieces of Ukrainian equipment, but it's not showed by this footage. And indeed, that's the footage that ISW says and posted footage of Russian forces striking Ukrainian tanks. That footage doesn't show that, and the only other piece of information that I can find in their footnotes there is this, which states, again uses a Ukrainian slur. The Ukrainians last night attempted an offensive in the Vuhledar direction, tried to infiltrate in small groups and occupy part of the forest clearings. After the shooting battle, the enemy pulled back. I would like to note, I wrote about it yesterday, that the enemy has a large number of drones in this direction. Judging by the tactics of use, either already formed units of drones operate here or they are being formed and tested on the battlefield. Interesting, but I don't know that it says exactly what the ISW says it says. There might be some loss of Ukrainian forces, mechanized equipment in that area. Either way, it appears that the Ukrainians are attempting some kind of counterattack here, and that there is activity in the area. So a couple of important bits of information around not so much this one, but the next one. But this is supposedly an AGTM hit south of Pavlivka. Now, Vuhledar is up here. One assumes that the ATGM would come from Vuhledar, but that's quite a long way for that to hit. I think this is the footage concerning that that hit on a BMP-1 there, but there are some claims that there are several vehicles that were destroyed in the area. And before we got onto that, so yeah, anyway, that's the vehicle getting taken out by an ATGM. That's been geolocated to here, and as you can see, that is quite a long way south of Vuhledar. Now, the ATGM could be operated from any number of places. I guess it doesn't have to come from Vuhledar. But if you think that they've got maybe a 5-kilometer range, I guess if you're in a building there, that's within range. I mean, you'd be stretching it, but you can pretty much hit anything with an TGM from one of these buildings in the Pavlivka area, and indeed into Mikilska. So you can see why this high ground up in Vuhledar is a real advantage for the Ukrainians. Now, this is just out now. I was just looking for that footage and I found this, which is a Ukrainian Su-25 that's been shot down by the 155th Brigade in the Vuhledar direction. Here is the footage, although that obviously that's just smoke on the ground, but one presumes that is pretty accurate. It's been reported in quite a number of places. So yeah, Su-25 taken out near Vuhledar, a Ukrainian Su-25. So that'll be a huge loss to the Ukrainians if that is indeed true. Okay, as far as the rest of the regions are concerned, so Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the rest of Donetsk Oblast, there's been nothing but sort of routine artillery duels. There are some really important notes to make here, though, as the ISW states. Ukrainian Mariupol mayoral advisor reported that Russian forces in Mariupol have not conducted any major movements recently and continue to reinforce Mariupol as some Russian forces deploy from Mariupol to other areas, including Vuhledar area. Melitopol Mayor Fedorov stated that Russian forces continue to transport personnel and defensive fortifications through Melitopol between other rear areas and the front. So there's the idea that in this whole area down here, the Russians are kind of preparing for a Ukrainian counteroffensive, or what are their thoughts? So Mariupol getting sort of defensive troops are readying for defensive there, but also moving to other places like Vuhledar. But then troops are moving through Melitopol to defend other areas of Zaporizhia. Russian sources that previously warned about a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive in Zaporizhia Oblast are now warning that Ukrainian forces may conduct a counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast. Kherson Oblast occupation head Saldo claimed on April the 18th that Ukrainian forces have concentrated unspecified forces on the west bank of the Kherson Oblast and Dnipro River, demonstrated a willingness to cross the Dnipro River. Saldo's claim coincides with Russian President Putin's recently reported visit to the Russian rear on the Arabat Spit in Kherson Oblast to check Russian preparations for a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive. Mail bloggers went into greater detail on Saldo's claims, largely assessing the Ukrainian forces are preparing to establish a bridgehead across the Dnipro River. Another prominent Russian mill blogger claimed that reports of a Ukrainian counterattack in western Zaporizhia Oblast, northern Melitopol, are false, but that Ukrainian forces are preparing a counteroffensive push near Polohoy and Orikhiv. So, okay, that's to say that because I've been talking that I've been sort of speculating where I think the counteroffensives would be. There's some Russian mill bloggers saying actually it's not going to come north from Mariupol, but more likely from Orikhiv and through Polohy. So it could be something like that. That seems pretty sensible. I mean, any of these options, really, they'll know the geography and the defenses better than I, of course. So I think you'll get multiple launches down from this Zaporizhia and Donetsk region, or possibly just in the Zaporizhia area, to cut this land bridge. But it needs to be not a thin salient like that, because you're really vulnerable to being surrounded. So I'd say a larger, wider, but I don't know, maybe two offensives and then joining that together, pushing the Russians out. But I'm not too sure. But I have mentioned previously that while they're doing that, there could be, if they could get soundly across the Dnipro River, they could, do a counter-offensive around here as well. Because at the end of the day, they really want to push the Russians out of this whole area to give Crimea a lot of pressure, not to invade it, but just so they can absolutely hammer it with ordnance from this general area here, and reach as far as they can. So they're really that kind of does make sense. I could see that it could be an attack down here. Yep, that's for sure, and then a counteroffensive through here as well, or some kind of feint, or I don't know. Who knows? There's so many options. But yeah, that seems fairly sensible to me. Anyway, that's the end of the Frontline update. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate the support that you give to the channel. And there are many ways you can do that. All of the information is in the description below. Please hang out around ATP Geopolitics and check out my Ukraine war update extra video that will come out a little bit later today. Sorry, words are really difficult for me today. My MS, I've had a pretty bad couple of days with my multiple sclerosis, and it is making my brain go nuts, or not go nuts, just fail to work at all. Anyway, whatever, stop whinging. Cheers, speak to you soon.